I want you to picture a scene in the absolute middle of World War II. The Blitz is actively raging overhead, bringing total devastation as German bombers rain high explosives down on London, reducing entire city blocks to rubble and ash. It is a nightmare scenario. Yet, deep beneath the English countryside, far away from the burning capital, lies a damp subterranean stone quarry. It is dark, freezing cold, and the air smells heavily of wet limestone. Hidden down in that darkness, surrounded by sandbags and armed guards, sits the single most important artifact in the entire history of human aviation. It is the original 1903 Wright Flyer, the physical, actual machine of wood and muslin that first conquered the sky at Kitty Hawk. The visual contrast is almost unbelievably jarring. This incredibly fragile, delicate machine literally birthed the modern aerial age, and yet it is locked away in a freezing underground cave, desperately hiding from a catastrophic global war fought by its own technological descendants. The very sky this little wooden plane opened up had become entirely weaponized. The immediate, glaring question this setup demands is, why on earth isn't this priceless piece of American heritage sitting safely behind velvet ropes in the United States? Why is America's crown jewel hiding out in a British rock quarry? The answer isn't a simple logistical error. It involves a bitter 30-year grudge match, ruthless corporate espionage, secret middle-of-the-night modifications to a crashed airplane, and a clash of egos so massive it literally altered the course of global history. Before we reconstruct the uncut, deeply human lives of Orville and Wilbur Wright, make sure you subscribe to Legendary Lives Unveiled and like this video, so we can continue bringing you the profound hidden truths of history's most fascinating figures. We are here to systematically dismantle the sanitized mythological version of the Wright brothers taught in grade school. We have all been handed a very neat, tidy narrative of two simple, cheerful Midwestern bicycle mechanics who tinkered their way into the sky through sheer American grit and a positive attitude. The historical record shatters this comforting story, revealing a narrative overflowing with counterintuitive twists and profound human flaws. We are going to uncover a mother who was the true mechanical genius of the family, a forgotten third man who built the impossible engine that made flight a reality, and a ruthless patent war that crippled the United States military at the absolute worst possible time. We will even explore Orville Wright's highly classified, secret involvement in cracking Nazi Enigma codes during World War II. Throughout this exploration, we will navigate the incredibly delicate and often highly destructive line between brilliant innovation and the obsessive, almost paranoid desire to own it. They didn't just invent a flying machine. They essentially invented the entire discipline of modern aeronautical engineering from scratch. Yet, their subsequent actions raise profound, uncomfortable questions about the fundamental nature of invention, the sharing of knowledge, and what happens when the desire to protect a legacy ends up poisoning it. To understand how two high school dropouts solved a physics and engineering problem that had utterly defeated the greatest, best-funded scientific minds on the planet, we must examine the unique, deeply contradictory household they grew up in. The foundational matrix of their genius was meticulously laid down by their parents, Milton and Susan Wright. Milton was a stern, highly disciplined bishop in the Church of the United Brethren in Christ. While one might assume this meant a household of rigid religious dogmatism that shunned modern science, Milton provided two absolutely critical elements to his children's upbringing. First, he maintained a massive, incredibly diverse personal library, heavily stocked not just with theological texts and biblical commentaries, but with scientific journals, mechanical texts, encyclopedias, and accounts of natural philosophy. He fiercely encouraged his children to read omnivorously, mandating that if something aroused their curiosity, They must investigate it thoroughly, cultivating an environment where intellectual pursuit was a moral imperative. Milton also brought home the crucial spark, the physical object that planted the seed of flight. In 1878, he returned from a long church trip with a toy for his boys. Not a wooden horse or a top, but a rubber band-powered toy helicopter, designed by the French aeronautical pioneer Alphonse Pinot. The boys, aged 11 and 7 at the time, called it the Bat, and were utterly mesmerized by its applied physics. Relying on torsion, the twisted rubber band stored kinetic energy that transferred to the rotors, creating lift, and it featured counter-rotating blades to prevent the whole fuselage from just spinning out of control, an early lesson in Newton's third law. They didn't just play with it. They studied it and built larger, heavier copies to see if the physics scaled up. They quickly learned that physics is cruel because when they made it twice as big, it required 8 times the power to lift it, and the rubber bands simply couldn't do it, providing a harsh lesson in weight and power. But beyond intellectual curiosity, Milton instilled a much darker, rigid, uncompromising, and deeply paranoid moral philosophy in his children, which is the crucial psychological key to understanding everything they did later in life. Milton deeply believed and preached that the world was an inherently hostile, corrupt place for honest people. He taught them that outsiders were always trying to take advantage of you, that friends would inevitably betray you for their own gain, and that unscrupulous people were always lying in wait in the shadows to steal the fruits of your labor. In his worldview, the closed circle of the Wright family unit was the absolute only safe harbor you could ever trust. They were primed from childhood to believe everyone was a thief, which completely explains their intense paranoia later on, their refusal to show their early gliders to the press, and the vicious lawsuits they launched. The historical record flips completely on its head when examining the other side of the household. We always hear about the Wright brothers, but the actual mechanical mastermind of the family, the person who taught them how to use tools, how to measure, and how to build, was their mother, Susan Kerner Wright. She is a phenomenal, historically overlooked figure who truly deserves her own chapter in the history of engineering. Educated at Hartsville College in Indiana, which was incredibly rare for a woman at the time, she was the top mathematician in her class. More importantly, she spent her youth working directly alongside her father in his carriage-making shop, developing a profound, intuitive mechanical aptitude with real practical experience. She didn't just mend clothes. She designed and built her own complex household appliances and intricate mechanical toys for the children from scratch. Meanwhile, Milton, the bishop, was all theory and no practice. He was fundamentally helpless with physical objects and couldn't drive a nail straight into a wooden board to save his life. If the boys hit a technical roadblock while building something in the barn, they didn't ask their father. They went straight to their mother. This absolutely forces us to re-examine our deeply ingrained cultural reverence for the solitary male genius inventor archetype, like Thomas Edison alone in his lab. Wilbur and Orville's most vital skill, their ability to visualize complex, unbuilt mechanisms in 3 dimensions and understand how physical forces would act upon moving parts, was directly inherited from and systematically nurtured by Susan. She taught them how to translate an abstract mathematical concept into a physical machine. They applied this mechanical translation very early on. Neither brother actually graduated high school. Wilbur finished 4 years, but lacked a diploma because the family moved, and Orville simply dropped out in his junior year to start a printing business. Their first massive joint mechanical engineering project wasn't a bicycle or a glider. It was a printing press. But they didn't buy one. They built it from absolute scrap, creating a perfect distillation of their combined genius. To print a newspaper efficiently, a press must apply immense, perfectly even pressure across a flat surface, but commercial presses were vastly too expensive. They scavenged parts, building it using an old horse-drawn buggy and a literal broken tombstone. For a printing press to work, the bed where the metal type sits must be flawlessly, microscopically flat. If it is warped even a millimeter, the ink won't transfer evenly. A polished marble grave marker from a local stonecutter provided one of the flattest surfaces available in Dayton, Ohio, in the 1880s. To snap the heavy press down onto the paper with tremendous repeated force, they realized the heavy steel suspension springs of a buggy possessed incredible kinetic energy potential, repurposing them to drive the press mechanism. Looking at a broken grave marker and rusted buggy suspension, and visualizing a functional, highly precise, rapidly moving printing press, demonstrates the level of mechanical alchemy their brains were capable of executing. It was the absolute perfect storm of nurture. Milton provided intellectual curiosity, the sprawling library, and a fierce, almost paranoid self-reliance, while Susan provided rigorous mathematical precision, spatial reasoning, and hands-on, grease under the fingernails mechanical genius. By the 1890s, they had established this incredible, deeply ingrained mechanical prowess and were running a highly successful, highly profitable bicycle shop, manufacturing their own custom brands, the Van Cleve and the St. Clair. So what compelled two comfortable mechanics to look up at the sky and decide to tackle the most dangerous unsolved puzzle in human history? It was sparked by a highly publicized tragedy, the 1896 death of German aviation pioneer Otto Lilienthal, widely known as the father of gliding. After hundreds of successful glides from an artificial hill, providing the world with aerodynamic data, Lilienthal, a global celebrity, died in a horrific crash. His machines had a fatal flaw. They lacked adequate control. He tried to steer simply by shifting his body weight, like a modern hang glider. But when a sudden, massive thermal updraft stalled his glider, simply throwing his legs wasn't going to generate enough physical force to right the aircraft. The wind was stronger than his body weight. He couldn't shift his weight fast enough, plunged 50 feet, and broke his spine. His awful death made international headlines and deeply affected the Wrights, reawakening their dormant fascination with flight planted by the toy helicopter years ago. They realized that someone had to solve the control issue. By 1899, they were intensely serious, stepping out of their comfortable lives and looking up toward the sky. But to solve a problem that had killed the world's most famous aviator, they would have to completely redefine the fundamental laws of physics. By 1899, the Wright brothers were intensely serious. Wilbur wrote a formal letter to the Smithsonian Institution, introducing himself as an inquiring citizen and asking for all available reading materials, pamphlets, and lists of books on aeronautics. And this is where their daily lives as bicycle mechanics gave them an absolute unparalleled superpower that the world's top scientists and university professors completely lacked. They possessed the bicycle mindset. The Wrights looked at all historical attempts at flight and systematically divided the challenge into three distinct separate problems: wings to generate lift, an engine to provide propulsion, and a mechanism for control. That third point, control, is where the entire global scientific community was failing miserably. Up to that point, other inventors were obsessed with propulsion, thinking a massive steam engine strapped to a large wing would simply muscle its way into the air. Others sought inherent stability, designing planes with heavily angled wings, hoping the machine would function like a ship floating on water and automatically right itself. But the Wrights, because they built, repaired, and rode bicycles every single day, knew intuitively that a machine could be fundamentally, inherently unstable, yet completely safe and manageable, as long as it was guided by an active, responsive operator. A bicycle has zero inherent stability. If pushed forward and let go, it falls over. A rider keeps it upright by constantly, unconsciously making microscopic adjustments to the handlebars and shifting their weight to dynamically balance the machine. The Wrights realized an airplane couldn't be driven like a ship. It had to be ridden like a bicycle. The pilot had to be in total active command of the machine's balance at all times. This was a massive, foundational paradigm shift in aeronautical thinking. They achieved a conceptual breakthrough by stepping out of the workshop and simply observing nature. Wilbur spent hours watching turkey vultures soaring over the Miami River in Dayton, noticing that birds do not just shift their weight to maintain balance in turbulent air. They actively change the shape of their wings. If a bird is tipped violently to the right by a gust of wind, it twists the trailing edge of its left wing down and the right wing up. This opposite twisting changes the aerodynamic lift. The wing twisted down catches more air, creating more lift and pushing that side back up to right the bird. They called this elegant response to instability wing warping. Figuring out how to build a mechanical structure strong enough to carry a man but flexible enough to twist on command was a profound challenge. Wilbur solved it by idly twisting a long cardboard inner tube box in the bicycle shop. He realized you could brace a biplane structure with wires, but leave it just loose enough to physically torque the entire wing assembly. They tested this concept on a 5-foot biplane kite in the summer of 1899, using a system of 4 control lines to physically twist the flexible wings from the ground, and it darted left and right flawlessly. With the control concept proven in miniature, they needed to build a full-size man-carrying glider, and to test it safely, they needed a very specific environment. They required wide-open spaces free of trees, a soft landing surface for inevitable crashes, and consistent strong winds to generate enough lift. Methodical as always, they wrote to the United States Weather Bureau for wind data, and meteorologists pointed them to a remote, sandy, isolated stretch of barrier islands on North Carolina's Outer Banks called Kitty Hawk. It possessed steady 15 to 20 mile-per-hour winds, rolling off the ocean and miles of massive, soft sand dunes. They tested their gliders in the fall of 1900 and returned with a much larger machine in 1901. But the 1901 tests were an absolute, soul-crushing disaster. The massive glider, with a 22-foot wingspan, produced only about 1/3 of the lift their mathematical calculations had predicted. Worse, when they used their brilliant wing warping system to initiate a turn, the glider suffered from a terrifying aerodynamic phenomenon we now call adverse yaw, which they dubbed well digging. The physics of adverse yaw were terrifying for Wilbur Wright, strapped to the front of that plunging machine. If you want to bank left, you warp the right wing down to create more lift on that side. That increased lift raises the right wing, but physics demands a toll. The increased curve also creates massively increased drag, acting like a parachute catching the air. So, while the right wing rises, the massive drag pulls it violently backward. The glider tilts left, but the nose swings violently right, losing all forward momentum, stalling, and spinning wildly toward the sand. The machine was fundamentally fighting itself, and Wilbur was nearly killed in a crash caused by this exact phenomenon. The failure was so total that on the long train ride home to Dayton, Wilbur fell into a profound depression. Staring out the window, he turned to Orville and delivered one of the most famously pessimistic quotes in scientific history. "Not within 1,000 years would man ever fly." His despair was absolute, because they had done everything perfectly. They had followed the science, basing their wing curvatures and lift calculations on the aerodynamic tables published by Otto Lilienthal and the esteemed scientists of the era. It was like trying to build a massive, 100-story steel skyscraper. Your welding is perfect. Your blueprints are flawless. But the metal ruler you were handed to measure the steel beams is secretly 11 inches long instead of 12. The foundational math of the universe they were handed was a lie. The accepted mathematical constant used to calculate air pressure and lift, known as the Smeaton coefficient, which had been calculated centuries earlier and accepted as gospel, was simply incorrect. Most people would quit when the world's greatest scientists are proven wrong. Instead, the Wright brothers pivoted. They realized that if the map is wrong, they had to draw their own map. In the fall of 1901, they cleared out a back room of their bicycle shop and built a wind tunnel. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar industrial complex. It was a 6-foot wooden box with a glass viewing window and a fan driven by the shop's gasoline engine. The sheer genius lay in the delicate measuring instruments they fashioned out of old hacksaw blades. Hacksaw blades are made of tempered steel, which flexes and bends at a constant, mathematically predictable rate. By mounting miniature, perfectly scaled metal wings onto these blades inside the wind tunnel, they measured exactly how far the blade bent backward to calculate drag and upward to calculate lift. They tested 38 different miniature wing surfaces over months, systematically recording lift and drag at various angles of attack. By December 1901, they had compiled their own entirely original, flawlessly accurate aerodynamic tables, throwing out Lilienthal's data and the Smeaton coefficient. They didn't just invent the airplane in that dusty back room. They essentially invented modern aeronautical engineering, becoming the first human beings to possess the correct mathematical figures required to design a flying machine that would actually work. Armed with this new data, they constructed the 1902 glider with longer, narrower wings, proving vastly more efficient. To solve the terrifying adverse yaw problem, they added a movable vertical tail rudder. Crucially, they synchronized it, linking the tail rudder control wires to the hip cradle that controlled the wing warping. When the pilot shifted his hips to bank left, the tail rudder automatically turned to counteract the drag, forcing the nose to follow the turn and keeping the flight coordinated. The 1902 glider was a massive historic success, making between 700 and 1,000 perfectly controlled glides down the dunes of Kitty Hawk. They had definitively mastered both lift and control, but a glider is still just falling with style. To achieve true flight, you need sustained propulsion. They needed an engine, and their constraints were brutal. Knowing exactly how much lift their wings produced, they calculated the aircraft's maximum weight, requiring an engine capable of at least 8 horsepower, but weighing no more than 180 pounds. They wrote to premier automobile manufacturers across the United States, and the responses were unanimous. What the Wright brothers asked for was physically impossible. The heavy cast iron used for engine blocks meant any 8-horsepower engine would weigh far more than 180 pounds. This forced the brothers to turn their gaze inward, back to their own bicycle shop, and to the unsung hero of our story, Charlie Taylor. Taylor was a master machinist, a mechanician hired to run the daily operations while the Wrights were in North Carolina. Handed a crude sketch, Taylor was essentially told the auto industry deemed it impossible, and he was asked if he could build it. In just 6 weeks, using nothing more than a drill press and a standard 14-inch lathe, Taylor built a 12-horsepower, 4-cylinder, water-cooled internal combustion engine entirely from scratch. To solve the crippling weight problem, he orchestrated an engineering miracle. He contacted a local foundry to cast the heavy engine crankcase out of a newly available, incredibly lightweight aluminum copper alloy, sourced from the Aluminum Company of America. Casting a complex engine block out of aluminum in 1903, without it warping or cracking as it cooled, was a massive metallurgical breakthrough. To meet the weight limit, the engine was dangerously stripped down, lacking spark plugs, a carburetor, and a fuel pump. The fuel system was purely gravity-fed. A small 1.5-gallon metal tank of gasoline was mounted high up on a wing strut. Raw liquid gasoline dripped down a tube into a shallow chamber next to the hot engine cylinders. The radiating heat of the aluminum crankcase literally boiled the liquid gasoline into a combustible vapor sucked into the cylinders. Imagine lying on your stomach, strapped to a fragile wooden frame, inches from raw liquid gasoline dripping onto hot metal. It sounds like an incendiary bomb waiting to happen. But it worked, weighing only 152 pounds and producing 12 horsepower. They mounted this miraculous engine onto the lower wing of the 1903 Flyer, built from lightweight spruce wood and covered in tightly woven Pride of the West cotton muslin, a fabric typically manufactured for women's underwear, chosen pragmatically because it was strong, caught the air, and was incredibly light. On the cold, desolate, windy morning of December 17th, 1903, at Kitty Hawk, Orville won the coin toss. The Flyer accelerated down a wooden launching rail and lifted into the freezing air. That first flight was erratic, lasting just 12 seconds and covering 120 feet. But it was powered, controlled, heavier than air flight. By noon on the fourth flight, Wilbur took the controls and made a spectacular, sustained flight lasting 59 seconds and covering 852 feet. The ancient puzzle was finally solved. Yet, history often omits a crucial, dramatic detail. After that triumphant fourth flight, as they stood on the beach, talking with adrenaline pumping, a violent gust of wind whipped off the ocean. It caught the wings, flipping the entire machine end over end across the hard sand before they could grab the struts. The delicate spruce airframe was completely destroyed. The engine block cracked and the ribs shattered, reducing the machine to a tangled pile of splinters and torn muslin. The 1903 Flyer, the most famous airplane in human history, flew for exactly one single morning, made 4 flights and never flew again. But as the shattered wood settled on the sand, a darker storm was already brewing. One not made of wind, but of ink, patents, and an obsession that would soon ground the very future they had just set free. But before we move past this triumph on the desolate sands, I must push back hard on the traditional historical narrative. If Charlie Taylor literally built the aluminum engine that changed the world in just 6 weeks, an engine that the entire automotive industry declared impossible, why isn't his name chiseled into every textbook alongside Wilbur and Orville? It is a profound look at the nature of collaborative innovation and how history assigns credit. Contractually, Charlie Taylor was merely an employee, viewing himself as a mechanic doing a job he was paid to do. In an interview given much later in life, he reflected on building the miraculous engine and humbly stated that it didn't seem to be anything wonderful at the time. He did not seek the spotlight or demand his name on the patent. But let us be absolutely clear. Without Taylor's genius, without that incredibly lightweight aluminum block engine, the heavy wooden and muslin Flyer would have remained permanently glued to the sand of Kitty Hawk as nothing more than a heavy glider. This is a striking reminder that history is heavily edited by the victors. Think about how many indispensable people exist in the shadows of your own industry today. The ones who execute brilliant ideas, write millions of lines of code, and machine the microscopic parts to make visions a reality, yet never get their names on the company letterhead. This quiet omission of credit transitions us into the most controversial, heavily debated aspect of the Wright brothers' legacy: the patents. Having achieved this impossible miracle and unlocked the sky, you might naturally expect them to share it, ushering in a golden age of scientific collaboration. After all, science builds on science, and they had directly benefited when Octave Chanute freely gave them his gliding data and the Smithsonian sent them reading lists. Instead, the narrative takes a very dark, legally aggressive turn. The Wright brothers locked down their invention with an iron grip, and in doing so, effectively stalled human progress in aviation for nearly a decade. On May 22, 1906, after years of secrecy, they finally secured United States patent number 821,393. The crucial distinction that most people misunderstand is that they did not patent the airplane as a whole physical machine. They didn't patent the engine, the propeller, or the shape of the wings. Astoundingly, they patented the underlying abstract system of three-axis aerodynamic control. They patented the very concept of balancing in the air, claiming ownership over the invisible geometry of how a plane moves. Claim one of their patent basically asserted ownership over any method of changing the angles of the lateral margins of a wing to control roll. If you built a flying machine with any mechanical method of tipping one side up and the other down to steer, you owed them money. They used this impossibly broad patent like a blunt weapon. In 1909, they formed the Wright Company, selling their patent rights to this new corporation for $100,000 in upfront cash, 40% of the total company stock, and a 10% royalty on every single aircraft sold. They became incredibly wealthy. And then, a profound shift occurred. They essentially stopped inventing. They stopped pushing the boundaries of aerodynamic technology and testing new wing designs, locking themselves in boardrooms to launch an incredibly aggressive, relentless legal enforcement campaign. They demanded exorbitant licensing fees, sometimes $1,000 per plane, a staggeringly prohibitive sum at the time, and filed injunctions against anyone who attempted to build, sell, or even exhibit a powered airplane in the United States. Their primary, most hated target was another brilliant aviation pioneer and engine genius named Glenn Curtiss. Curtiss realized that physically twisting the entire wooden wing structure in midair was structurally dangerous and aerodynamically inefficient, weakening the wood and fabric over time. So, Curtiss invented a vastly superior alternative: ailerons. Ailerons are the little hinged flaps on the trailing edge of the wings. Instead of twisting the whole wing, you just move the flap up or down, a mechanism used on every modern airplane today, from a Cessna to a Boeing 747. Curtiss argued in court that he wasn't using their wing warping system, but rather a completely separate, mechanically different, structurally superior mechanism. The Wrights' lawyers fired back, arguing their patent covered any method of achieving lateral control, regardless of the physical mechanism. If it controlled roll, the Wrights owned it. Shockingly, the United States courts ultimately agreed with the Wrights, securing crushing legal injunctions against Curtiss and even suing foreign aviators who brought planes to the U.S. for air shows. The French press, who had previously idolized them, turned on them viciously, publishing articles calling the Wright brothers veritable birds of prey. The devastating result of this relentless litigation was a dark period historians refer to as the Patent Wars. While Europe, specifically France, Germany, and Britain, largely ignored the patents, poured money into new designs, and rapidly advanced their aviation technology, the United States aviation industry completely froze. American aircraft manufacturers were terrified to experiment or innovate, knowing the moment a plane left the ground, they would be hit with a crippling lawsuit. The downstream consequences were genuinely shocking. By the time the United States entered World War I in April 1917, the very country that invented the airplane possessed absolutely zero combat-capable aircraft. American fighter pilots arriving in Europe had to fly French Nieuports and British Sopwith Camels into combat because American planes were dangerously obsolete. The national security threat was so dire that the U.S. government, specifically under Assistant Secretary of the Navy Franklin D. Roosevelt, aggressively intervened. Roosevelt essentially held a gun to the head of the Wright and Curtiss companies, forcing the creation of a patent pool in the Manufacturers Aircraft Association to cross-license technology for a low, flat fee, just so the country could legally build planes to fight the war. It is agonizing to reconcile the morality of this chapter. The same men who gave humanity the ultimate miracle of flight hoarded it so jealously that they prevented America from having planes to defend itself. Are they heroes, fiercely protecting their intellectual property, or patent trolls who let greed overshadow their genius? They spent their own meager bicycle shop profits, risked their physical safety on every test flight, and received zero government grants, meaning legally and morally, they absolutely deserved to control the financial fruits of their extraordinary labor. Yet, locking down the fundamental geometry of flight effectively betrayed the collaborative scientific community that gave them the theoretical tools to get off the ground. Their insistence on monopolistic market control created what economists call an anti-commons effect. A tragedy of the anti-commons occurs when too many individuals have rights of exclusion over a vital resource, leading to its severe underutilization. By aggressively patenting control, they choked out all improvement patents, blocking Curtiss from improving the airplane with ailerons. It is a classic, tragic, cautionary tale of business ego, rooted in their father's paranoid worldview, completely overtaking their scientific curiosity. This relentless legal war had an agonizingly steep personal cost. Wilbur, the point man constantly traveling, testifying, and fighting in courtrooms, died from typhoid fever in 1912 at just 45 years old. Orville genuinely believed and publicly stated that the severe physical and mental exhaustion from fighting these relentless lawsuits completely destroyed Wilbur's immune system, essentially blaming Glenn Curtiss and the legal battles for his brother's premature death. This hardened Orville's heart even further, turning bitter animosity into one of the most petty, yet utterly fascinating institutional feuds in the history of American science. The 30-year grudge match with the Smithsonian Institution. To understand this cinematic conspiracy, involving literal midnight cover-ups, we must rewind to just before the 1903 Kitty Hawk success. The Smithsonian, the premier scientific body in America, had heavily, publicly, and financially backed its former secretary, a highly respected scientist named Samuel Pierpont Langley, securing a staggering $50,000 government grant, a massive fortune in 1903 compared to the $1,000 of bicycle money the Wrights spent. Langley built a flying machine called the aerodrome, but this government-backed mega-project was a catastrophic failure. In late 1903, they attempted to launch the aerodrome via a massive spring-loaded catapult mounted on top of a houseboat floating in the middle of the Potomac River. The structural integrity failed upon launch, plunging the machine into the freezing river and nearly drowning the pilot, just 9 days before the obscure Wright brothers flew successfully. This humiliating public disaster subjected the Smithsonian to ridicule and severely damaged their political ability to secure future congressional funding. Nursing a massive bruised ego, the story fast forwards to 1914. Glenn Curtiss, drowning in lawsuits and losing in federal court, desperately needed to prove someone else built a capable flying machine before the Wrights to invalidate their broad patent. Curtiss entered a shady conspiracy with the new Smithsonian head, Secretary Charles Walcott, who allowed Curtiss to take the wrecked, waterlogged remains of Langley's disgraced 1903 aerodrome out of storage and secretly ship them to his aviation facility in Hammondsport, New York. Under the guise of testing, Curtiss didn't just restore it. He heavily and fundamentally modified the machine. He changed the structural bracing, altered wing curvature based on modern aerodynamic knowledge, completely overhauled the drivetrain, ripped out the original engine to install a much more powerful 1914 engine, and fitted it with hydro-aeroplane floats. Curtiss essentially hot-wired a failed 1903 machine with an entire decade of stolen 1914 technology. This Frankenstein machine managed a few short, shaky hop flights off the water. Curtiss took pictures, claimed Langley's design was sound all along, and used this to argue against the Wright patents. The truly infuriating part followed. The Smithsonian quietly took the aerodrome back to Washington, secretly stripped away all of Curtiss's modern modifications to revert it to its 1903 appearance, and placed it prominently on public display. They attached a highly deceptive label, proudly proclaiming it was the first man-carrying airplane capable of sustained free flight. It was a blatant institutional lie. They deliberately let a corporate competitor hotwire a failed invention, covered up the evidence, and tried to rewrite aviation history just to salvage political reputation and help Curtiss break a patent monopoly. Orville was understandably, absolutely enraged, believing Curtiss literally killed his brother, and watching the nation's premier scientific institution actively conspire to steal their legacy for a man whose plane crashed into a river. Orville initiated the ultimate act of retaliation. Possessing the original 1903 flyer that the Smithsonian desperately wanted, Orville packed up America's greatest invention in 1928, shipped it across the Atlantic Ocean, and permanently loaned it to the Science Museum in Kensington, London. He publicly declared he would not bring it back to American soil until the Smithsonian admitted they lied, stubbornly holding his ground for decades. The standoff finally broke in 1942 in the midst of World War II, when Fred C. Kelly, compiling a highly researched, authorized biography, threatened the new Smithsonian secretary, Charles Abbott, with permanent, indelible public embarrassment. Kelly threatened that his upcoming book would detail the entire sordid history of the Curtiss conspiracy with receipts, leaving the Smithsonian to carry the historical shame of exiling the flyer forever if Orville died before it was resolved. Under direct threat of this explosive exposure, the Smithsonian finally caved. They published a formal, comprehensive retraction listing Curtiss's secret modifications, admitted the 1914 tests proved absolutely nothing about its 1903 capabilities, and issued a formal apology, unequivocally acknowledging Orville and Wilbur Wright as the true, sole inventors of the airplane. This legally paved the way for the flyer to return home. Due to the danger of German bombing raids, the Science Museum had moved it into that damp British stone quarry for safekeeping, and it didn't physically return to the United States until late 1948. It finally took its rightful place of honor in the Smithsonian on December 17, 1948, the exact 45th anniversary of the first flight at Kitty Hawk. But in a deeply bittersweet, heartbreaking footnote, Orville died of a heart attack in January 1948, 11 months before the plane went on display. He won the war, but he didn't live to see the parade. Orville's death brings us to the final, most mind-bending revelation hidden in the sources. History paints a tragic picture of Orville's later years, suggesting he faded away as a lonely, reclusive tinkerer sitting on the porch of his Dayton mansion after Wilbur's death and selling the company in 1915. But declassified engineering logs reveal a mind that absolutely never stopped shaping the future of human technology. He wasn't just fixing neighborhood bicycles. He was actively engaged in cutting-edge military and civilian engineering. During World War I, he served as a consulting engineer and co-designed the Liberty Eagle, effectively the world's first guided missile and unmanned aerial torpedo. He co-invented the split flaps, later used heavily on military dive bombers in World War II to control rapid descents and prevent them from ripping apart. He even worked directly with Chrysler in the late 1920s and early 30s, personally overseeing the wind tunnel tests for the DeSoto Airflow, one of the first radically aerodynamically designed mass-production automobiles. But the ultimate secret, shattering any preconceived notions of who Orville Wright was, happened under the cloak of extreme secrecy during World War II. While his canvas and wood airplane was hiding in a British rock quarry from the Luftwaffe, Orville was quietly collaborating with the National Cash Register Company, NCR, and a brilliant engineer named Joseph Desch in a highly secure facility in Dayton. The German Navy's devastating U-boat fleet used the incredibly complex Enigma cipher machine to encode military communications, utilizing interchangeable rotating electromechanical rotors that scrambled the alphabet with staggering combinations. To crack these codes quickly enough to save Allied ships, massive machines called bombs were built to physically simulate every possible rotor position at lightning speed. The U.S. military tasked NCR with building these incredibly complex 5,000-pound electromechanical computers, and the man who flew a canvas kite powered by a sputtering gravity-fed aluminum engine in 1903 was brought in to consult on the project. Applying his decades of mechanical expertise, he helped develop specialized encryption and cipher mechanisms for the United States Navy. This completely forces us to reevaluate how we freeze historical figures in black and white grain in their most famous moment. Orville's relentless probing mechanical aptitude, sparked by his mother building toys in the kitchen and his father bringing home a rubber band helicopter, never died. It merely evolved with the century. He went from building wooden printing presses out of broken tombstones in the 1880s to conceptualizing the aerodynamic geometry of canvas gliders to casting internal combustion engines, and finally, in the twilight of his life, actively contributing to the dawn of electromechanical computing and cryptography. His single mind served as a literal bridge between a 19th century horse-drawn carriage shop and the terrifying dawn of the information age. As we summarize this incredible journey, it is abundantly clear that Wilbur and Orville Wright weren't just two simple guys who built a plane. They were infinitely complex, deeply flawed, paranoid, brilliant men operating within a dense psychological matrix of fierce family loyalty and unmatched mechanical genius. They achieved the absolute impossible and gave humanity the sky. And then their own very human flaws and instilled fear of stolen legacy compelled them to act in ways that almost strangled the very aviation industry they gave birth to. If we connect this historical saga to the explosive evolution of technology we are experiencing right now, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, commercial space travel, quantum computing, we must ask a final question. If the Wright brothers had successfully maintained their total, unyielding, monopolistic legal grip over the fundamental concept of aerodynamic control, where would aviation be today? Would we have ever broken the sound barrier or reached the moon? Does the rigid legal right to entirely own an idea ultimately serve human progress? Or is true, paradigm-shifting progress only truly made when inventors are forced to let go, collaborate, and share the sky? That is a phenomenal, deeply relevant question to leave on. If this deep dive into the archives shifted how you look at the pioneers of history, and if you want to keep exploring the hidden truths behind the world's most fascinating figures, make sure you subscribe to the channel, Legendary Lives Unveiled. We rely on your support to keep digging through these incredible stories. Leave a comment down below. Do you think the Wright brothers were justified in their ruthless patent wars? Or did their greed hold the world back? Like this video, share it with a fellow history buff, and join us next time on Legendary Lives Unveiled as we continue uncovering the hidden truths behind history's greatest icons.